Hello, we're back again with more reading. Yeah. So, let's see if I remember what happened last time. So last time, our dude Zamakana reached not the plateau, the planis. I don't know the name in English. Well, the flatlands. Yes, reached the flatlands of the underworld and found a temple to hide on and rest. And then some natives of the underworld reached him. Yep, and on chapter 4 he was talking with them. Yes, learning of things they had to teach him or something like that. Yes, like who are they, what they're doing there, how their way of life and stuff like that. Yes. So now let's go to chapter 5. Also, let me put chat on the phone just cause, yes, not super needed, but I'll do it regardless. Yes, me. Okay. Let's start. Jared tells. Well, maybe I can shorten this a bit just so I can see myself. Bit shorter. Perfect. Oh, thank you for the follow, Yuri Tasuko. Yuri Tasuko. Yuri Tasuko. Sorry for butchering your name, but yeah, thank you. Welcome. Welcome to the cave. Yeah. Today is reading day. Oh, thank you, the sleepy elf. Hello. Sorry yesterday I couldn't really see your stream. My internet is not the best, and yesterday after stream for some reason was really struggling. I don't know why. But yeah. Also hello and thank you for the follows. Yes. Hi Yuri. Yurita. Hi. Hello. Okay, let's start reading. Also, how are you guys doing? Yes, I forgot to ask. I should always ask. How you guys doing? Doing good? Kayla is feeling a bit sleepy because, she ate a lot during lunch. Okay, am I sitting straight? Not quite. And now I am. Okay. So let's actually start now. So, chapter 5. The long conversation of Zanokana and his visitors took place in the green-blue twilight of the grove, just outside the temple door. Oh, you redeemed glasses, so I'm wearing glasses right now. Sorry, I just maximized the window of my browser. So, since you redeemed glasses, I'm gonna take them off. Bye-bye glasses. There we go. No glasses. Window. There. Okay, temple door. Some of the men recline on the weeds and moss beside a half-vanished walk, while others, including the Spaniard and the chief spokesman of the Tsa party, sat on the occasional low monolithic pillars that lined the temple approach. Almost a whole terrestrial day must have been consumed in the colloquy. I know this is the word for colloquy, but I don't know how to read it. Okay. for Zemacona felt the need of food several times and ate from his well-stocked pack, while some of the Tsa party went back for provisions to the roadway, where they had left the animals on which they had ridden. At length the prime leader of the party brought the discourse to a close, and indicated that the time had come to proceed to the city. There were, he affirmed, There were, he affirmed, several extra beasts in the cavalcade, upon one which Zamacona could ride. The prospect of mounting one of those ominous hybrid entities, whose fabled nourishment was so alarming, and a single sight of which had set charging buffalo into such a frenzy of flight, was by no means reassuring to the traveler. There was, moreover, another point about the things which disturbed him greatly. The apparently preternatural intelligence with which some members of the previous day's roving pack had reported his presence to the men of Tsa, and brought out the present expedition. But Zamacona was not a coward, hence followed the men boldly down the weed-grown walk toward the road where the things were stationed. And yet he could not refrain from crying out in terror at what he saw when he passed through the great vine-draped pylons and emerged upon the ancient road. He did not wonder that the curious Wichita had fled in panic, and had to close his eyes for a moment to retain his sanity. It is unfortunate that some of the pious reticence prevented him from describing fully in his manuscript the nameless sight he saw. As it is, he merely hinted at the shocking morbidity of these great floundering white things, with black fur on their backs, a rudimentary horn in the center of their foreheads, and an unmistakable trace of human or anthropoid blood in their flat-nosed, bulging-lipped faces. They were, he declared later in his manuscript, the most terrible objective entities he ever saw in his life, either in Knyan or in the outer world. And the specific quality of their supreme terror was something apart from any easily recognizable or describable feature. The main trouble was that they were not wholly products of nature. Okay, so basically, it seems they are unicorns with human-esque faces. Well, I can agree that it does not seem very pretty. Yep. The party observed Zamacona's fright and hastened to reassure him as much as possible. The beasts, or Chayayoth, they explained, surely were curious things, but were really very harmless. The flesh they ate was not that of intelligent people of the master race, but merely that of a special slave class, which had, for the most part, ceased to be thoroughly human, and which indeed was the principal meat stock of Knyan. They, or their principal ancestral element, had first been found in a wild state amidst the cyclopean ruins of the deserted red-litten world of Yoth, which lay below the blue-litten world of Nyan. That part of them was human seemed quite clear, but men of science could never decide whether they were actually the descendants of the bygone entities who had lived and reigned in the strange ruins. The chief ground for such a supposition was the well-known fact that the vanished inhabitants of Yoth had been quadrupedal. This much was known from the very few manuscripts and carvings found in the vaults of the Zen, beneath the largest ruined city of Yoth. But it was also known from these manuscripts that the beings of Yoth had possessed the art of synthetically creating life, and had made and destroyed several efficiently designed races of industrial and transport animals, yes, in the course of their history. To say nothing of concocting all manner of fantastic living shapes for the sake of amusement and new sensations during the long period of decadence. The beings of Yoth had undoubtedly been reptilian in affiliations, and most physiologists of Tsa agreed that the present beasts had been very much inclined towards reptilianism before they had been crossed with the mammal slave of Gnayan. So I guess this explains the myth that, the government is ruled by lizard people. Maybe. That's what I glean from this. Yes. It argues well for the intrepid fire of those Renaissance Spaniards who conquered half the unknown world, that Pánfilo de Zamacona y Núñez actually mounted one of the morbid beasts of Tsa and fell into place beside the leader of the cavalcade. The name named Glusain, yes, Mr. Yin, who had been most active in the previous exchange of information. It was a repulsive business, but after all, the seat was very easy, and the gait of the clumsy Jayoth surprisingly even and regular. No saddle was necessary, and the animal appeared to require no guidance whatsoever. The procession moved forward at a brisk gait, stopping only at certain abandoned cities and temples, about which Zamacona was curious, and which Mr. Yin was obediently, ready to display and explain. The largest of these towns, Bigra, was a marvel of finely wrought gold, and Zamacona studied the curiously ornate architecture with avid interest. Buildings tended toward height and slenderness, with roofs bursting into a multitude of pinnacles. The streets were narrow, curving, and occasionally picturesque. Anyway, hilly. But Ian said that the later cities of Na were far more spacious, and regular in design. All these old cities of the plain showed traces of leveled walls, reminders of the archaic days when they had been successfully conquered by the now dispersed armies of Tsa. There was one object along the route which Yin exhibited on his own initiative, even though it involved a detour of about a mile along the vine-tangled side path. Side paths, yes. Let me check something. Well, my internet is not very happy. Yes. Well, sorry. That was my sister. Also, do I have... Ah, yes. Yes, I do have. This is trying to display a stream. That's probably why we're losing frames. Sorry. Cannot really display the stream right now. Okay, let's continue. Hop, 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 hop. This was a squat, plain temple of black basalt, blocks without a single carving, and containing only a vacant, unexpressible pedestal. The remarkable thing about it was its history, but it was a link with a fabled elder world compared to which even cryptid Yoth was a thing of yesterday. It had been built in imitation of certain temples depicted in the vaults of Zin, to house a very terrible black toad idol found in the red Litton world, and called Tsatsogua in the Yothic manuscripts. It had been a potent and widely worshipped god, and after its adoption by the Temple of Knayan, had lent its name to the city which was later to become dominant in that region. Yothic legend said that it had come from a mysterious inner realm beneath the red Litton world, a black realm of peculiar sensed beings which had no light at all, but which had great civilizations and mighty gods before ever the reptilian quadrupeds, that's word, man, of Yoth, yes, quadrupeds of Yoth, had come into being. Many images of Tsatsogua existed in Yoth, all of which were alleged to have come from the Black Inner Realm, and which were supposed by Yothic archaeologists to represent the aeon extinct race of that realm. The Black realm called Nkai in the Yothic manuscripts had been explored as thoroughly as possible by these archaeologists, and singular stone thoughts or burrows had excited infinite speculation. With the man of Knyan, when the men of Knyan discovered the red litten world and deciphered its strange manuscripts, they took over the Satsokua cult and brought all the frightful toad images up to the land of the blue light, housing them in shrines of quarried, yes, basalt, like the ones Amakona now saw, yeah. The cult flourished until it almost rivaled the ancient cults of Yig and Tulu, and one branch of the race even took it to the outer world, where the smallest of the images eventually found a shrine at Olasoe, in the land of Lomar near the Earth's North Pole. It was rumored that this outer world cult survived even after the Great Ice Sheet, and the hairy Gnovkes what destroyed Lomar. But such matters not much was definitely known of Canaan. But of such matters not much was definitely known of Nyan. In that world of blue light, the cult came to an abrupt end, even though the name of Tsa was suffered to remain. What ended the cult was the partial exploration of the black realm of Nikai, beneath the red litten world of Yoth. According to the Yothic manuscripts, there was no surviving life in Nikai, but something must have happened in the aeons between the days of Yoth and the coming of man to the earth. Something perhaps not unconnected with the end of Yoth. Probably it had been an earthquake, opening up lower chambers of the lightless world which had been closed against Yothic archaeologists, or perhaps some more frightful juxtaposition of energy and electrons, wholly unconceivable to any of vertebrate minds, had taken place. At any rate, when the men of Knyan went down to Nkai Black Abyss with their great atom-powered searchlights, they found living things that oozed along stone channels and worshipped onyx and basalt images of Tsatsogua. But they were not toads like Tsatsogua himself. Far worse. They were amorphous lumps of viscous black slime that took temporary shapes for various purposes. The explorers of Gnayan did not pause for detailed observations, and those who escaped alive sealed the passage leading from the red-litten Yoth down into the gulfs of nether terror. Then, all the images of Tsatsugua in the land of Gnayan were dissolved into the ether by disintegrating rays, and the cult was abolished forever. Okay, so they were afraid of slimes. Hi. Aeons later, when naive fears were outgrown and supplanted by scientific curiosity, the old legends of Tsatsugua and Nikai were called, and a suitably armed and equipped exploring party went down to Yoth to find the closed gate of the Black Abyss and see what might still lie beneath. But they could not find the gate, nor could any man ever do so in all the ages that followed. Nowadays, there were those who doubted that any abyss had ever existed, but a few scholars who could still decipher the Yothic manuscripts believed that the evidence for such a thing was adequate, even though the middle records of Canaan, with accounts of the one frightful expedition into Nakai, were more open to question. What? I read it weirdly. Okay. Some of the later religious cults try to suppress remembrance of Nikai's existence and attached severe penalties to its nation. But these had not begun to be taken seriously at the time of Semecona's advent to Canaan. As the cavalcade returned to the old highway and approached the low range of mountains, Semecona saw that the river was very close to the left. Somewhat later, as the terrain rose, the stream entered a gorge and passed through the hills. Not the walls, the hills. Sorry. While the road traversed the gap at a rather higher level close to the brink. It was about this time that light rainfall came. Semecona noticed the occasional drops and drizzle, and looked up at the coruscating blue sky. But there was no diminution of the strange radiance. Yin then told him that such condensations and precipitations of the water vapor were not uncommon, and that they never dimmed the glare of the vault above. A kind of mist, indeed, always hung about the lowlands of Canaan, and compensated for the complete absence of true clouds. The slight rise of the mountain's path enabled Semecona, by looking behind, to see the ancient and deserted plain in panorama as he had seen it from the other side. He seemed to have appreciated its strange beauty, and to have vaguely regretted leaving it, for he speaks of being urged by Yin to drive his beast more rapidly. When he faced frontward again, he saw that the crest of the road was very near, the weed-grown way leading starkly up and ending against a blank void of blue light. The scene was undoubtedly highly impressive. A steep green mountain wall on the right, a deep river chasm on the left, with another green mountain wall behind it, and ahead the churning sea of bluish coruscations into which the upward path dissolved. Then came the crest itself, and with it the world of Tsa outspread into a stupendous forward vista. Semecona caught his breath at the great sweep of peopled landscape, yes. For it was a hive of settlement and activity beyond anything he had ever seen or dreamed of. The downward slope of the hill itself was relatively thinly strewn, with small farms and occasional temples. But beyond it lay an enormous plain covered like a chessboard, with planted trees, irrigated by narrow canals cut from the river, and threaded by wide, geometrically precise roads of gold and basalt blocks, or basalt blocks. Great silver cables, borne aloof on the golden pillars, linked the low, spreading buildings and clusters of buildings which rose here and there. And in some places one could see lines of partly ruinous pillars without cables. Moving objects showed the fields to be under tillage, and in some cases Zamacona saw that men were plowing with the aid of the repulsive half-human quadrupeds. Cannot say that word yet. Okay. Drinking water again. But most impressive of all was the bewildering vision of the clustered spires and pinnacles which rose far off across the plain and shimmered flower-like and spectral in the coruscating blue light. At first Zamacona thought it was a mountain covered with houses and temples, like some of the picturesque hill cities of his own Spain. But a second glance showed him that it was not indeed such. It was a city of the plain, but fashioned in such heaven-reaching towers that its outline was truly that of a mountain. Above it hung a curious greyish haze, through which the blue light glistened, and took added overtones of radiance from the million golden minarets. Glancing at Yin, Zamacona knew that this was the monstrous, gigantic, and omnipotent city of Tsa. As the road turned downward toward the plain, Zamacona felt a kind of uneasiness and a sense of evil. He did not like the beast he rode, or the world that could provide such a beast, and he did not like the atmosphere that brooded over the distant city of Tsa. When the cavalcade began to pass occasional farms, the Spaniard noticed the forms that worked in the fields, and did not like their motions or proportions, or the mutilations he saw on most of them. Moreover, he did not like the way that some of these farms were herded in corrals, or the way they grazed on the heavy verdure. Verdure? Does that mean grass? Like that. Yin indicated that these beings were members of the slave class, and that their acts were controlled by the master of the farm, who gave them hypnotic impressions in the morning of all they were supposed to do during the day. As semi-conscious machines, their industrial efficiency was nearly perfect. Those in the corrals were inferior species, classified merely as livestock. Upon reaching the plain, Zamacona saw the larger farms and noted that the almost human work performed by the repulsive horned Jiayoth. He likewise observed the more man-like shapes that toiled along the furrows, and felt a curious fright and disgust toward certain of them whose emotions were more mechanical than those of the rest. These, Ian explained, were what men called the Yimpi. Yimpi? Organisms which had died, but which had been mechanically reanimated for industrial purposes by means of atomic energy and thought power. The slave class did not share the immortality of the freemen of Tsa, so that with time the number of EMB had become very large. They were dog-like and faithful, but not so readily amenable of thought commands as were living slaves. Those which most repelled Zamacona were those whose mutilations were greatest. For some were wholly headless, while others had suffered singular and seemingly capricious subtractions, distortions, transpositions, and graftings in various places. The Spaniard could not account for this condition, but Jean made it clear that these were slaves who had been used for the amusement of the people in some of the vast arenas. For the men of Tsa were connoisseurs of delicate sensation, and required a constant supply of fresh and novel stimuli for their jaded impulses. Zamacona thought by no means squeamish, was not favorably impressed by what he saw and heard. Okay, but you know that there is a thing called toradas, which is basically sticking things in the back of a bowl. A bowl, yes. Although they don't actually reanimate the bowl, so I guess it's not comparable. I don't know, but when I just thought of that sport. Yes, I don't know if it can be called a sport, but anyway. Because here talked about arenas, and yeah, it's something that it's done in an arena. So yeah. Okay. Continuing. Approach more closely, the vast metropolis became dimly horrible in its monstrous extent and inhuman height. Yin explained that the upper parts of the great towers were no longer used, and that many had been taken down to avoid the bother of maintenance. The plain around the original urban area was covered with newer and smaller dwellings, which in many cases were preferred to the ancient towers. From the whole mass of gold and stone, a monotonous road of activity drawn outward over the plain, while cavalcades and streams of wagons were constantly entering and leaving over the great gold or stone-paved roads. Several times Yin paused to show Zamacona some particular object of interest, especially the temples of Yig, Tulu, Nug, Yeb, and the not-to-be-named one, which lined the road at infrequent intervals, with each in its embowering grove according to the custom of Nayan. These temples, unlike those of the deserted plains beyond the mountains, were still in use. Large parties of mountain worshippers coming and going in constant streams. Yin took Zamacona into each of them, and the Spaniard watched the subtle orgiastic rites, which fascination and repulsion. The ceremonies of Nug and Yeb sickened him especially, so much indeed that he refrained from describing them in the manuscript. One squat black temple of Sasogua was encountered, but it had been turned into a shrine of Snub Nigurath, the all-mother of and wife of the not-to-be-named one. This deity was a kind of sophisticated Astarte, and her worship struck the pious Catholic as supremely obnoxious. What he liked least of all were the emotional sounds emitted by the celebrants, jarring sounds in a race that had ceased to use vocal speech for ordinary purposes. Close to the compact outskirts of Tsa, and well within the shadow of its terrifying towers, Yin pointed out a monstrous circular building before which enormous crowds were lined up. This, he indicated, was one of the many amphitheaters, yes, where curious sports and sensations were provided for the weary people of Knyan. He was about to pause and usher Zemacon inside the vast curved facade, when the Spaniard, recalling the mutilated forms he had seen in the fields, violently demurred. This was the first of those friendly clashes of taste which were to convince the people of Tsa that their guest followed strange and narrow standards. Tsa itself was a network of strange and ancient streets, and despite a growing sense of horror and alienage, Semakona was enthralled by its intimidations of mystery and cosmic wonder. The dizzy giganticism of its overing towers, the monstrous surge of teeming life through its ornate avenues, the curious carvings on its doorways and windows, the odd vistas, glimpses, yes, from balustraded plazas and tiers of Titan terraces, and the enveloping grey haze which seemed to press down on the gorge-like streets in low-ceilinged fashion, all combined to produce such a sense of adventurous expectancy he had never known before. He was taken at once to a council of executives, which held forth in a gold and copper palace behind a garden and fountained park, and was for some time subjected to a close, friendly questioning in a vaulted hall frescoed with vertiginous arabesques, yes, that's the word. Much was expected of him. He could see in the way of historical information about the outside world, but in return all the mysteries of Knyan would be unveiled to him. The one great drawback was the inexorable ruling that he might never return to the world of sun and stars in Spain, which was his. A daily program was laid down for the visitor, with time apportioned apportionated, yes, that's the word, judiciously among several kinds of activities. There were to be conversations with persons of learning in various places, and lessons in many branches of Thathic lore. Liberal periods of research were allowed for, and all of the libraries of Knyan both secular and sacred, were to be thrown open to him as soon as he might master all the written languages. Rites and spectacles were to be attended, except when he might specially object, and much time would be left for the enlightened, enlightened, yes, enlightened. Now I lost myself. Now, enlightened pleasure-seeking and emotional titillation, which form the goal and nucleus daily life. God damn it. A house in the suburbs or an apartment in the city would be assigned to him, and he would be initiated into one of the large faction groups, including many noblewomen of the most extreme and art-enhanced beauty, which in later day Canaan took the place of family units. Several horned yachts would be provided for his transportation and errand running, and 10 living slaves with intact body would serve to conduct his establishment and protect him from thieves and sadists and religious orgiasts of the public highways. There were many mechanical devices which he must learn to use, but Jean would instruct him immediately regarding the principal ones. Upon his choosing an apartment in preference to a suburban villa, Zmakona was dismissed by the executives with great courtesy and ceremony, and was led through several gorgeous streets to a cliff-like carven structure of some 70 or 80 floors. More water. Preparations for his arrival had already been instituted, and in a spacious ground floor suite of vaulted rooms slaves were busy adjusting hangings and furniture. There were lacquered and inlaid tabourets, velvet and silk reclining corners, and squatting cushions, and infinite rows of teakwood and ebony pigeonholes with metallic cylinders containing some of the manuscripts he was soon to read. Standard classics which all urban apartments possessed. Desks with great stacks of membrane paper and pots of the prevailing green pigment were in every room, each with graded sets of pigment brushes and other odd bits of stationery. Mechanical writing devices stood on ornate golden tripods, while over all was shed a brilliant blue light from energy globes set in the ceiling. There were windows, but at this shadowy ground level they were of a scant illuminating value. In some of the rooms were elaborate baths, while the kitchen was a maze of technical contrivances. Supplies were brought, Zmakona was told, through the network of underground passages which lay beneath Tsa, and which had once accumulated curious mechanical transports. There was a stable on the ground level for the beasts, and Zmakona would presently be shown how to find the nearest runway to the street. Before this inspection, was finished, the permanent staff of slaves arrived and were instructed. And shortly after, there came some half-dozen freemen and noblewomen of his future affection group, who were to be his companions for several days, contributing what they could to his instruction and amusement. Upon their departure, another party would take their place, and so onward in rotation through a group of about 50 members. And that was chapter 5. Very poorly written. Read. Yeah. Okay, so chapter 6. I think this is not the last one, but second to last? Yeah. Okay, thus was Pánfilo de Zamacón y Núñez absorbed for 4 years into the life of the sinister city of Tsa, in the blue-lit netherworld of Knyan. All that he learned and saw and did is clearly not told in his manuscript, for a pious reticence overcame him when he began to write in his native Spanish tongue, and he dared not set down everything. Much he consistently viewed with repulsion, and many things he steadfastly refrained from seeing or doing or eating. For other things he atoned by frequent counting of the beads of his rosary. He explored the entire world of Knyan, including the deserted machine cities of the Middle Period on the coarse brown plain of Nith, and made one descent into the red-litten world of Yoth to see the Cyclopean ruins. He witnessed prodigies of craft and machinery which left him breathless, and beheld human metamorphoses, dematerializations, rematerializations, and reanimations which made him cross himself again and again. His very capacity for astonishment was blunted by the plethora of new marvels which every day brought him. But the longer he stayed, the more he wished to leave. For the inner life of Knyan was based on impulses very plainly outside his radius. As he progressed in historical knowledge, he understood more, but understanding only heightened his distaste. He felt that the people of Tsa were a lost and dangerous race, more dangerous to themselves than they knew, and that their growing frenzy of monotony warfare and novelty quest was leading them rapidly towards a precipice of disintegration and utter horror. His own visit, he could see, had accelerated their unrest, not only by introducing fears of outside invasion, but by exciting in many a wish to sally forth and taste the diverse external world he described. As time progressed, he noticed an increasing tendency of the people to resort to dematerialization as amusement, so that the apartments and amphitheaters of Tsa became a veritable witch's sabbath of transmutations, age adjustments, death experiments, and projectations, yes. Projections. Projections, not projectations. With the growth of boredom and restlessness, he saw cruelty and subtlety and revolt were growing apace. There were more and more cosmic abnormality, more and more curious sadism, and more ignorance and superstition, and more desire to escape out of physical life into a half-spectral state of electronic dispersal. All his efforts to leave, however, came to nothing. Persuasion was useless, as repeated trials proved. Though the mature disillusion of the upper classes at first prevented them from resenting their guests' open wish for departure, in a year which he reckoned as 1543, Demacona made an actual attempt to escape through the tunnel by which he had entered Canaan. But after a weary journey across the deserted plain, he encountered forces in the dark passage which discouraged him from future attempts in that direction. As a means of sustaining hope, in keeping the image of home in mind, yes, he began about this time to make rough drafts of the manuscript relating his adventures, delighting in the loved old Spanish words and the familiar letters of the Roman alphabet. Somehow he fancied he might get the manuscript to the outer world, and to make it convincing to his fellows, he resolved to enclose it in one of the Sulu metal cylinders used for sacred archives. That alien magnetic substance could not but support the incredible story he had to tell. But even as he planned, he had little real hope of ever establishing contact with the Earth's surface. Every known gate he knew was guarded by persons or forces that it were better not to oppose. His attempt at escape had not helped matters, for he could now see a growing hostility to the outer world he represented. He hoped that no other European would find its way in, for it was possible that later comers might not fare as well as he. He himself had been a cherished fountain of data, and as such had enjoyed a privileged status. Others, deemed less necessary, might receive rather differential treatment. He even wondered what would happen to him when the sages of Tsa considered him drained dry of fresh facts, and in self-defense began to be more gradual in his talks on earth lore, conveying whenever he could the impression of vast knowledge held in reserve. One other thing which endangered Zamakona's status in Sa was his persistent curiosity regarding the ultimate abyss of Nakai, beneath the red-litten Yoth, whose existence the dominant religious cults of Canaan were more and more inclined to deny. When exploring Yoth, he had vainly tried to find the blocked-up entrances, and later on he experimented in the art of dematerialization and projection, hoping that he might thereby be able to throw his consciousness downward into the gulfs which his physical eyes could not discover. Though never becoming truly proficient in these processes, he did manage to achieve a series of monstrous and portentous dreams, which he believed included some elements of actual projection into Nikai. Dreams which greatly shocked and perturbed the leaders of Yig and Tulu worship when he related them, and which he was advised by friends to conceal rather than exploit. In time, those dreams became very frequent and maddening, containing things which he dare not record in his main manuscript, but of which he prepared a special record for the benefit of certain learned men in Sa. It may have been unfortunate, or it may have been mercifully fortunate, that Samakona practiced so many reticences and reserved so many themes and descriptions for subsidiary manuscripts. The main document leaves one to guess much about the detailed manners, customs, thoughts, language, and history of Kanayan, as well as to form any adequate pictures of the visual aspect in daily life of Tsa. One is left puzzled too about the real motivations of the people, their strange passivity and craven unwarlikeness, and their almost cringing fear of the outer world despite their possession of atomic and dematerializing powers, which would have made them unconquerable had they taken the trouble to organize armies as in the old days. It is evident that Kanayan was far along in its decadence, reacting with mixed apathy and hysteria against the standardized and timetabled life of stultifying regularity which machinery had brought it during its middle period. Even the grotesque and repulsive customs and modes of thought and feeling can be traced to this source. For in his historical research, Simakona found evidence of bygone eras, and in which Kanayan had held ideas much like those of the classic and Renaissance outer world, and had possessed a national character and art full of what Europeans regard as dignity, kindness, and nobility. The more Simakona studied these things, the more apprehensive about the future he became, because he saw that the omnipresent moral and intellectual disintegration was a tremendously deep-seated and ominously accelerating movement. Even during his stay, the signs of decay multiplied. Rationalism degenerated more and more into fanatical and orgiastic superstition, centering in a lavish adoration of the magnetic tool metal, and tolerance steadily dissolved into a series of frenzied hatreds, especially towards the outer world of which the scholars were learning so much from him. At times, he almost feared that the people might someday lose their age-old apathy and brokenness, and turn like desperate rats against the unknown lands above them, sweeping all before them by virtue of their singular and still remembered scientific powers. But for the present, they fought their boredom and sense of emptiness in other ways, multiplying their hideous emotional outlets and increasing the mad grotesqueness and abnormality of their diversions. The arenas of Sa must have been accursed and unthinkable places. Simakona never went near them, and what they would they would be in another country. Even in another decade, he dared not to think. The pious Spaniard crossed himself and counted his beads more often than usual in those days. In the year 1545, as he reckoned it, Zamacona began what may well be accepted as his final series of attempts to leave Canaan. His fresh opportunity came from unexpected from the beginning. His fresh opportunity came from an unexpected source, a female of his affection group, who conceived for him a curious individual infatuation based on some hereditary memory of the days of monogamous wedlock in Sa. Over this female, a noble woman of moderate beauty and of at least average intelligence named Tlayub, Zamacona acquired the most extraordinary influence, finally inducing her to help him in an escape under the promise that he would let her accompany him. Chance provided a great factor in the course of the events, for Tlayub came of a primordial family of gate lords who had retained oral traditions of at least one passage to the outer world, which the mass of the people had forgotten even at the time of the great closing. A passage to a mound on the level plains of Earth which had, in consequence, never been sealed up or guarded. She explained that the primordial gate lords were not guards or sentries, but merely ceremonial and economic proprietors. Yes, proprietor. Half feudal and baronial in status, of an era preceding the severance of surface relations. Yes. Her own family had been so reduced at the time of the closing that their gate had been wholly overlooked, and they had ever afterward presented the secret of its existence as a sort of hereditary secret, a source of pride and of a sense of reserve power, to offset the feeling of vanished wealth and influence which so constantly irritated them. Zamacona, now working feverishly to get his manuscript into final form in case anything should happen to him, decided to take with him on his outward journey only 5 beast loads of unalloyed gold in the form of small ingots used for minor decorations. Enough, he calculated, to make him a personage of unlimited power in his own world. He had become somewhat hardened to the side of a personage of I'm reading this. Oh my god. Okay, he had become thingy. Yeah. Hardened to the side of the monstrous Jayoth. Yes, I was reading the same line before. Yeah. Very good, Killer. Very good. Jayoth, during his 4 years of residence in Sa, hence did not shrink from using the creatures. Yet he resolved to kill and bury them, and cache the gold as soon as he reached the outer world, since he knew that even a glimpse of one of the things would drive any ordinary Indian man mad. Later, he could arrange for a suitable expedition to transport the treasure to Mexico. Tlaib, Tlaib he would perhaps allow to share his fortunes, for she was by no means unattractive, though possibly he would arrange for her sojourn amongst the Plains Indians, since he was not over anxious to preserve links with the manner of life in Tsa. For a wife, of course, he would choose a lady of Spain, or at worst, an Indian princess of normal outer world descent, and a regular approved past. But for the present, Tlaib must be used as a guide. The manuscript he would carry on his own person, encased in a book cylinder of the sacred and magnetic Tulu metal. The expedition itself is described in the addendum to Zamacona's manuscript. Maybe I should make a break. Maybe. After this paragraph. Okay, the expedition itself is described in the addendum to Zamacona's manuscript, written later and in hand, showing signs of nervous strain. It set out amidst the most careful precautions, choosing a rest period and proceeding as far as possible along the faintly lighted passages beneath the city. Zamacona and Tlaib, disguised in slaves' garments, yes, bearing provision knapsacks and leading the 5 laden beasts on foot, were readily taken for commonplace workers, and they clung as long as possible to the subterranean way, using a long and little frequented branch which had formerly conducted the mechanical transports to the now ruined suburb of Lusa. Amidst the ruins of Lusa, they came to the surface, thereafter passing as rapidly as possible over the deserted blue-litten plain of Neath, toward the Grayan range of low hills. There, amidst the tangled underbrush, Tlaib found a long disused and half-fabulous entrance to the forgotten tunnel, a thing she had seen but once before, aeons in the past, when her father had taken her thither to show her this monument to their family pride. It was hard work getting to Laden Jayath to scrape through the obstructing vines and briars, and one of them displaced a rebellious destined to bear dire consequences, bolting away from the party and lopping back toward Sa on its detestable pads, golden burden and all. Doing this small break now, yes. You know, Killer reads very badly. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious, yes. Just a bit though. Well, I don't know if I've done this since the beginning of streaming, but I feel like lately I've been slurring my words a lot. Maybe I should do some exercises or just, speak slower. Read slower too. Hmm. What do you think, Kitty? Should I read slower? Is that the issue? Is my stuttering the issue? Hmm. Ba-ba-ba. Ba-ba. Da-ba. Da-da. Da-da-da. Da-da. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Okay, let's make some exercises. Yes, opening my mouth so that the muscles stop being, so stuck. Okay, so it was nightmare work, burrowing by the light of Blu-ray torches upward, downward, forward, and upward again, through a dank, choked tunnel that no foot had trodden since ages before the sinking of Atlantis. And at one point, Tlaib had to practice the fearsome art of dematerialization on herself, Semicon and the leaden beasts in order to pass a point wholly clogged by shifting earth strata. It was a terrible experience for Zamacona, for although he had often witnessed dematerialization in others, and even practiced it himself to the extent of dream projection, he had never been fully subjected to it before. But Tlaib was skilled in the arts of Kanayan and accomplished the double metamorphosis in perfect safety. Thereafter, they resumed the hideous burrowing through stalactite crypts of horror, not terror, where monstrous carvings leered at every turn, alternately camping and advancing for a period which Zamacona reckoned as about 3 days, but which was probably less. At last they came to a very narrow place, where the natural and only slightly hewn cave walls gave place to walls of wholly artificial masonry, carved into terrible bas reliefs. These walls, after a mile of steep ascent, ended with a pair of vast niches, one on each side, in which monstrous niche-encrusted images of Yig and Tulu squatted, glaring at each other across the passage as they glared since the earliest youth of the human world. At this point, the passage opened into a prodigious vaulted and circular chamber of human construction, wholly covered with horrible carvings, and revealing at the further end an arched passageway with the foot of a flight of steps. Tlaib knew from family tales that this must be very near the earth's surface, but she could not tell just how near. Here the party camped for what they meant to be their last rest period in the subterraneous world. It must have been hours later that the clank of metal and the padding of the beast's feet awakened Zemacon and Tlaib. A bluish glare was spreading from the narrow passage between the images of Yig and Tulu, and in an instant the truth was obvious. An alarm had been given at Sa, as was later revealed, by the returning Giayoth, which had rebelled at their briar-choked tunnel entrance, and a swift party of pursuers had come to arrest the fugitives. Resistance was clearly useless, and none was offered. The party of 12 beast riders proved studiously polite, and the return commenced almost without a word or sought passage on either side. It was an ominous and depressing journey, and the ordeal of dematerialization and rematerialization at the choked place was all the more terrible because of the lack of that hope and expectancy which had blighted the process on the outward trip. Zemacon heard his captors discussing the imminent clearing of this choked place by intensive radiations, since henceforward sentries must be maintained at the hitherto unknown outer portal. What? It would not do to let outsiders get within the passage, for then any who might escape without due treatment would have a hint of the vastness of the inner world, and would perhaps be curious enough to return in greater strength. As with the other passages, since Zemacon coming, sentries must be stationed all along, as far as the very outermost gate. Sentries drawn from amongst all the slaves, the dead alive in B, or the class of something. Oh, hello Vincent! Hi. Thank you for the raid. Hello. Welcome to the bed display of reading. Hello. Welcome, raiders. Yes. Also, yes, very slow. Wait. Huh? There we go. Dun. So, I was lurking there earlier, but how is your Live 2D rendering software coming along? Did you make much progress today? Because honestly, I can't tell. I cannot tell. Also, how are you today, Vincent? How's life? No, gotta run and grab dinner? Hi! Go grab your dinner. Getting there slowly. Slowly but surely. Yeah. I don't know how long I'll stream from now on. I don't know how long this stream will last. Been reading for a while. Been slurring my words left and right. So I don't know. But yeah, thank you for the raid, Vincent. Yes, go grab your dinner. BRB. Maybe. Okay, let's continue our terrible reading. After just some water. Okay, where was I? Okay, sentries all along, as far as the very outermost gate, yes. Sentries drawn amongst all the slaves, the dead alive, VMB, or the class of discredited freemen. With the overrunning of the American plains by thousands of Europeans, as the Spaniard had predicted, every passage was a potential source of danger, and must be rigorously guarded until the technologists of Tsa could spare the energy to prepare an ultimate and entrance-hitting obliteration, as they had done for many passages in earlier and more vigorous times. Zemacon and Tlaib were tried before 3 Knan of the Supreme Tribunal in the Gold and Copper Palace behind the Garden and Fountain Park, and the Spaniard was given his liberty because of the vital outer world information he still had to impart. He was told to return to his apartment and to his affection group, taking up his life as before and continuing to meet deputations of scholars according to the latest schedule he had been following. No restrictions would be imposed upon him so long as he might remain peaceful in Canaan. But it was intimated that such leniency would not be repeated after another attempt at escape. Zemacon had felt that there was an element of irony in the parting words of the chief Canaan, an assurance that all of his Giayoth, including the one which had rebelled, would be returned to him. The fate of Tlaib was less happy, there being no object in retaining her, and her ancient Satthic lineage giving her act a greater aspect of treason than Zamacona had possessed. She was ordered to be delivered to the curious diversions of the amphitheater. Yep. And afterward, in a somewhat mutilated and half demoralized form, to be given the functions of a Yimbi, or animated corpse slave, and stationed among the sentries guarding the passage whose existence she had betrayed. Zemacona soon heard, not without many pangs of regret. He could scarcely have anticipated that poor Tlaib had emerged from the arena in a headless and otherwise incomplete state, and had been set as an outermost guard upon the mound in which the passage had been found to terminate. She was, he was told, a night sentinel, whose automatic duty was to warn off all comers with a torch, sending down reports to a small garrison of 12 dead slave Yimbi, and a 6th living but partly demoralized freeman in a vaulted circular chamber if the approachers did not heed her warning. She worked, he was told, in conjunction with a day sentinel, a living freeman who chose this post in preference to other forms of discipline for other offenses against the state. Zemacon, of course, had long known that most of the chief gate sentries were such discredited freemen. It was now made plain to him, though indirectly, that his own penalty for another escape attempt would be a service as a gate sentry, but in the form of a dead-alive Yimbi slave, and after the treatment, even more picturesque than that of which Telayev was reported to have undergone. It was intimated that he, or parts of him, would be reanimated to guard some inner section of the passage, within sight of others, where his abridged person might serve as a permanent symbol of the rewards of treason. But his informants always added it was of course inconceivable that he would ever court such a fate. So long as he remained peacefully in Knyan, he would continue to be free, privileged and respected personage. Yet in the end, Pamphilus de Macona did court the fate so directly hinted to him. True, he did not really expect to encounter it, but the nervous latter part of his manuscript makes it clear that he was prepared to face its possibility. What gave him a final hope of scarcely escape from Knyan was his growing mastery of the art of dematerialization. Having studied it for years and having learned still more than from the two instances which he had been subjected to, he now felt increasingly able to use it independently and effectively. The manuscript records several notable experiments in this art. Minor successes accomplished in his apartment, and reflects the Macona's hope that he might soon be able to assume in spectral form in full, attaining complete invisibility and preserving that condition as long as he wished. Once he reached this stage, he argued, the outer world way lay open to him. Of course he could not bear away any gold, but mere escape was enough. He would, though, dematerialize and carry away with him his manuscript in the tool metal cylinder. Even though it cost additional effort, for this record and proof must reach the outer world at all hazards. He now knew the passage to follow, and if he could thread it in a atom-scattered state, he did not see how any person or force could detect or stop him. The only trouble would be if he failed to maintain his spectral condition at all times. That was the one ever-present peril, as he had learned from his experiments. But must one not always risk death and worse in a life of venture? Zamacona was a gentleman of old Spain, of the blood that faced the unknown and carved out half the civilization of the New World. For many nights after his ultimate resolution, Zamacona prayed to Saint Pamphilus and other guardian saints, and counted the beads on his rosary. The last entry on the manuscript, which toward the end took the form of a diary, more and more, was a merely single sentence. Es más tarde de lo que lo pensaba. Tengo que marcharme. It is later than I thought. I must go. After that, only silence and conjecture, and such evidence as the presence of the manuscript itself, and what that manuscript could lead to, might provide. Well, there's only one more chapter. Let's finish it. Yeah, let's do that. It won't take too long, especially with my broken ass English, yes. Okay, chapter 7. When I looked up from my half stupefied reading and note-taking. The morning sun was high in the heavens. The electric bulb was still burning, but such things of the real world, the modern outer world, were far from my whirling brain. I knew I was in my room at Clyde Compton's at Binger's, but upon what monstrous vista had I stumbled? Was this thing a hoax, or a chronicle of madness? If a hoax, was it a jest of the 16th century or of today? The manuscript's age looked appealingly genuine to not my wholly unpracticed eyes, and the problem presented by the strange metal cylinder, I dared not even think about it. Moreover, what a monstrously exact explanation it gave of all the baffling phenomena of the Mound, of the seemingly meaningless and paradoxical actions of diurnal and nocturnal ghosts, and of the queer cases of madness and disappearances. It was even an accursedly plausible explanation, evilly consistent, if one could adopt the incredible. It must be a shocking hoax, devised by someone who knew all the lore of the Mound. There was even a hint of social satire in the account of that unbelievable netherworld of horror and decay. Surely this was a clever forgery of some learned cynic, something like the leaden crosses in New Mexico, which a jester once planted and pretended to discover as a relic of some forgotten Dark Age colony from Europe. Upon going down to breakfast, I hardly knew what to tell Compton and his mother, as well as the curious callers who had already begun to arrive. Still in a daze, I cut the Gordian knot by giving a few points from the notes I had made. I look pale. Well, I am a vampire. I am supposed to be pale, yogurt. Also, hello. I look pale. My speech is jumbled. I'm dead. Continue. Oh yeah. Hydration, thank you. I was going to thank you. Okay. Notes I had made. And mumbling my belief that the thing was a subtle and ingenious fraud left there by some previous explorer of the Mound. A belief in which everybody seemed to concur when told of the substance of the manuscript. It is curious how all that breakfast group, and all the others in Binger, to whom the discussion was repeated, seemed to find a great clearing of the atmosphere in the notion that somebody was playing a joke on somebody. For the time we all forgot that the known, recent history of the Mound presented mysteries as strange as any in the manuscript, and as far from acceptable solution as ever. The fears and doubts began to return when I asked for volunteers to visit the Mound with me. I wanted a larger excavation party, but the idea of going to that uncomfortable place seemed no more attractive to the people of Binger than it had seemed on the previous day. I myself felt a mounting horror upon looking toward the Mound and glimpsing the movement speck, which I knew was the daylight sentinel. For in spite of all my skepticism, the morbidities of that manuscript stuck by me and gave everything connected with the place a new and monstrous significance. I absolutely lacked the resolution to look at the moving speck with my binoculars. Instead, I set out with the kind of bravado we displayed in nightmares. When knowing we are dreaming, we plunge desperately into still sicker horrors for the sake of having the whole thing over the sooner. My pick and shovel were already out there, so I had only my handbag of smaller paraphernalia to take. Into this I put my strange cylinder and its content, feeling vaguely that I might possibly find something worth checking up with some part of the green-lettered Spaniard text. Even a clever hoax might be founded on some actual attribute of the Mound, which a former explorer had discovered, and that magnetic metal was damnably odd. God damn it. And that magnetic metal was damnably odd. Yeah. Grey Eagle's cryptic talisman still hung from its leathern cord around my neck. I did not look very sharply at the mound as I walked towards it, but when I reached it, there was nobody in sight. Repeating my upward scramble of the previous day, I was troubled by thoughts of what might lie close at hand if, by any miracle, any part of the manuscript were actually half true. In such case, I could not help reflecting the hypothetical Spaniard Zamacona must have barely reached the outer world when overtaken by some disaster. Perhaps an involuntary rematerialization, yes. He would naturally, in that event, have been seized by whichever sentry happened to be on duty at the time. Either the discredited freeman, or, as a matter of supreme irony, the very Tel Ayyub who had planned and aided his first attempt at escape. And in the ensuing struggle, the cylinder with the manuscript might well have been dropped on the Mound summit, to be neglected and gradually buried for nearly 4 centuries. But I added, as I climbed over the crest, one must not think of extravagant things like that. Still, if there were anything in that tale, it must have been a monstrous fate to which Zamacona had been dragged back. The amphitheater, mutilation, duty somewhere in the dank, nitrous tunnel as a dead alive slave, a maimed corpse fragment as an automatic interior sentry. It was a very real shock which chased this morbid speculation from my head, for upon glancing around the elliptical summit, I saw at once that my pick and shovel had been stolen. This was a highly provoking and disconcerting development, baffling too, in view of the seeming reluctance of all the Binger folk to visit the mound. Was this reluctance a pretended thing? And had the jokers of the village been chuckling over my coming discomfiture as they solemnly saw me off 10 minutes before? I took out my binoculars and scanned the gaping crowd at the village. No, they did not seem to be looking for any comic climax. Yet, was not the whole affair at the bottom of the colossal joke, in which all the villagers and reservation people were concerned? legends, manuscript, cylinder, and all. I thought of how I had seen the entry from a distance, and then found him unaccountably, and his mother, and of the unmistakable fright of most of the Binger people. On the whole, it could not very well be a village-wide joke. The fear and the problem were surely real, though obviously there were one or two jesting daredevils in Binger who had stolen out to the mound and made off with the tools I had left. Everything else on the mound was as I had left it, brush cut by my machete, slight bowl-like depression toward the north end, and the hole I had made with my trench knife in digging up the magnetism-revealed cylinder. Deeming it too great of a concession to the unknown jokers to return to Binger for another pick and shovel, I resolved to carry out my program as best that I could with the machete and trench knife in my handbag. So extracting these, I set to work excavating the bowl-like depression, which my eye had picked as possible site of a former entrance to the mound. As I proceeded, I felt again the suggestion of a sudden wind blow against me, which I had noticed the day before. A suggestion which seemed stronger and still more reminiscent of unseen, formless opposing hands laid on my wrists as I cut deeper and deeper through the root-tangled red soil and reached the exotic black loam beneath. The talisman around my neck appeared to twitch oddly in the breeze, not in any direction, as when attracted by the buried cylinder, but vaguely and diffusely, in a manner wholly unaccountable. Then, quite without warning, the black root-woven earth beneath my feet began to sink crankingly, while I heard a faint sound of shifting, falling matter below me. The obscuring wind, or forces, or hands, now seemed to be operating the very seat of the sitting, and I felt that they aided me by pushing as I leaped back of the hole to avoid being involved in any cave-in. Bending down over the brink and hacking at the mold-caked root tangle with my machete, I felt that they were against me again, but at no time were they strong enough to stop my work. The more roots I severed, the more falling matter I heard below. Finally, the hole began to deepen of itself toward the center, and I saw that the earth was sifting below into some large cavity beneath, so as to leave a good-sized aperture when the roots that had bound to it were gone. A few more hacks of the machete did the trick, and with the parting cave-in and uprush of curiously chill and alien air, the last barrier gave way. Under the morning sun yawned a huge opening of at least 3 feet square, and chewing the top of a flight of stone steps, which the loose earth of the collapse was still sliding. My quest had come to something at last. With an elation of accomplishment almost overbalancing fear for the nonce, I replaced the trench knife and machete in my handbag, took out my powerful electric torch, and prepared for a triumphant lone and utterly rash invasion of the fabulous netherworld I had uncovered. It was rather hard getting down the first few steps, both because of the fallen earth which had choked them, and because of a sinister up-pushing of cold wind from below. The talisman around my neck swayed curiously, and I began to regret the disappearing square of day above me. The electric torch showed dank, water-stained, and salt-encrusted walls fashioned with huge basalt blocks. And now and then I thought I descried some trace of carving beneath the nitrous deposits. I gripped my handbag more tightly and was glad of the comforting weight of the sheriff's heavy revolver in my right hand coat pocket. After a time, the passage began to wind this way and that, and the staircase became free from obstructions. Carvings on the walls were now definitely traceable, and I shuddered when I saw now clearly the grotesque figures resembled the monstrous bas-reliefs of the cylinder I had found. Winds and forces continued to blow malevolently against me, and at one or two bends I half fancied the torch gave glimpses of thin, transparent shapes, not unlike the sentinel on the mound, as my binoculars had showed him. When I reached this stage of visual chaos, I stopped for a moment to get a grip on myself. It would not do to let my nerves get the better of me at the very outset of what would surely be a trying experience, and the most important archaeological feat of my career. More water. But I wish I had not stopped at just that place, for the act fixed my attention on something profoundly disturbing. It was only a small object lying close to the wall, on one of the steps below me, but that object was such as to put my reason to a severe test, and bring up a line of the most alarming speculations. That the opening above me had been closed against all material forms for generations was utterly obvious, from the growth of shrub roots and accumulation of drift soil. Yet the object before me was most distinctly not many generations old, for it was an electric torch, much like the one I carried, warped and encrusted in the tomb-like dampness, but nonetheless perfectly unmistakable. I descended a few steps and picked it up, wiping off the evil deposits on my rough coat. One of the nickel bands bore an engraved name and address, and I recognized it with a start the moment I made it out. It read, Jas. C. Williams, 17 Throwbridge Street, Cambridge, Mass. And I knew that it had belonged to one of the two daring colleague instructors who had disappeared on June 28, 1915, only 13 years ago. And yet I had just broken through the thought of centuries. How had the thing got there? Another entrance? Or was there something, after all, in this mad idea of dematerialization and rematerialization? Doubt and horror grew upon me as I wound Still further down, and seemingly endless staircase. Would the thing never stop? The carvings grew more and more distinct, and assumed a pictorial quality, which brought me close to panic as I recognized many unmistakable correspondences with the story of Knayan, as sketched in the manuscript now resting in my handbag. For the first time, I began seriously to question the wisdom of my descent, and to wonder whether I had not better return to the upper air before I came upon something which would never let me return as a sane man. But I did not hesitate long, for as a Virginian, I felt the blood of ancestral fighters and gentlemen adventurers, pounding as protest against retreat from any peril known by or unknown. Yes, known or unknown, yes, not very smart dude, no. My descent became swifter rather than slower, as I avoided studying the terrible bas-reliefs and intaglios that had unnerved me. All at once I saw an arched opening ahead, and realized that the prodigious staircase had ended at last. But with that realization came horror in mounting magnitude. For before me there yawned a vast sculpted crypt, of all too familiar outline, a great circular space, answering in every last particular to the carving-lined chamber described in Zamacona's manuscript. It was indeed the place. There could be no mistake. And if any room for doubt yet remained, that room was abolished by what I saw directly across the great vault. It was a second arch opening, commencing a long, narrow passage, and having its mouth two huge opposite niches bearing loathsome and titanic images of shockingly similar pattern. There in the dark and clean Yig and hideous Tulu squatted eternally, glaring at each other across the passage as they had glared since the earliest youth of human world. From this point onward, I ask no credence for what I tell, for what I think I saw. It is too utterly unnatural, too utterly monstrous and incredible to be any part of sane human experience or objective reality. My torch, though casting a powerful beam ahead, naturally could not furnish any general illumination of the cyclopean crypt. So I now began moving it about to explore the giant walls little by little. As I did so, I saw to my horror that the space was by no means vacant, but was instead littered with odd furniture and utensils and heaps of packages which bespoke a populous recent occupation. No nitrous relics of the past, but queerly shaped objects and supplies in modern, everyday use. As my torch rested on each article or group of articles, however, the distinctness of the outline soon began to grow blurred, until in the end I could scarcely tell whether the things belonged to the realm of matter or the realm of spirit. All this while, the adverse winds blew against me with increasing fury, and the unseen hands plucked malevolently at me and snatched at the strange magnetic talisman I wore. Wild conceits surged through my mind. I thought of the manuscripts and what it said about the garrison stationed in this place. 12 dead slave Yimbi and 6 living, but partly dematerialized freemen. This was in 1545, 383 years ago. What since then? Zimakon had predicted change. Subtle disintegration, more dematerialization, weaker and weaker. Was it Grey Eagle's talisman that held them at bay? Their sacred Zulu metal. And were they feebly trying to pluck it off so that they might do to me what they had done to those who came before? It occurred to me with shuddering force that I was building my speculations out of full belief in the Zemakona's manuscript. This must not be. I must get a grip on myself. But, curse it, every time I tried to get a grip, I saw some fresh sight to shatter my poise still further. This time, just as my willpower was driving the half-seen paraphernalia into obscurity, my glance and torch beam had to light on two things of very different nature. Two things of the eminently real and sane world. Yet they did more to unseat my shaky reason than anything I had seen before, because I knew what they were, and knew how profoundly, in the course of nature, they ought not to be there. They were my own missing pick and shovel, side by side, and leaning neatly against the blasphemously carved wall of that hellish crypt. God in heaven, and I had babbled to myself about daring jokers in Binger. That was the last straw. After that, the cursed hypnotism of the manuscript got at me, and I actually saw the half-transparent shapes of the things that were pushing and plucking. Pushing and plucking those leprous Pelagian things with something of humanity still clinging to them, the complete forms, and the forms that were morbidly and perversely incomplete. All these, the hideous other entities, the four-footed blasphemies with ape-like face and projecting horn, and not a sound so far in all that nitrous inner earth. Then there was a sound, a flopping, a padding, a dull advancing sound which heralded beyond questioning. Heralded, that's totally how you read that. Questioning as structurally material as the pickaxe and shovel. Something wholly unlike shadow shapes that ring me in, yet equally remote from any sort of life as life is understood on the earth's wholesome surface. My shattered brain tried to prepare me for what was coming, but could not frame any adequate image. I could only say over and over to myself, it is of the abyss, but it is not dematerialized. The padding grew more distinct, and from the mechanical cast on the thread, I knew it was a dead thing that walked in the darkness. Then, oh God, I saw it in the full beam of my torch. Saw it framed like a sentinel in the narrow passage between the nightmare idols of the serpent Yig and the octopus Tulu. Let me collect myself enough to hint at what I saw, to explain why I dropped torch and headbag and handbag and fled empty-handed in the utter blackness, wrapped in a merciful unconsciousness which did not wear off until the sun and distant yelling and the shouting from the village roused me, as I lay gasping on the top of the accursed mound. I do not yet know what guided me again to the earth's surface. I only know that the watchers of Binger saw me stagger up into sight 3 hours after I had vanished. Saw me lurch up and fall flat on the ground as if struck by a bullet. None of them dared to come out and help me, but they knew I must be in a bad state, so tried to rouse me as best as they could by yelling in chorus and firing revolvers. It worked in the end, and when I came to, I almost rolled down the side of the mound in my eagerness to get away from that black aperture which still yawned open. My torch and tools, and the handbag with the manuscript were all down there. But it is easy to see why neither I nor anyone else ever went after them. When I staggered across the plain and into the village, I dare not tell what I had seen. I only muttered vague things about carvings and statues and snakes, and shaken nerves. And I did not faint again until somebody mentioned that the ghost sentinel had reappeared about the time I had staggered halfway back to town. I left Binger that evening, and have never been there since. Though they tell me the ghosts still appear on the mound as usual. But I have resolved to hint here at last what I dared not to hint to the people at Binger on that terrible August afternoon. I don't yet know how I can go about it, and if in the end you think my reticence strange, just remember that to imagine such horror is one thing, but to see it is another thing. I saw it. I think you recall my sighting early in this tale of the case of the bright young man named Ethan, who went out to that mound one day in 1891 and came back at night as the village idiot, babbling for 8 years about horrors and then dying in an epileptic fit. What he had kept moaning was, "That white man. Oh my God, what they did to him." Well, I saw the same thing that poor Ethan saw, and I saw it after reading the manuscript, so I know more of its history than he did. That makes it worse, for I know all that it implies, all that must still be brooding and festering and waiting down there. I told you it had padded mechanically toward me out of the narrow passage, and had stood sentry-like at the entrance between the frightful Eidola of Yig and Tulu. That was very natural and inevitable, because the thing was a sentry. It had been made a sentry for punishment, and it was quite dead. Besides lacking head, arms, lower legs, and other customary parts of human being. Yes, it had been very human. It had been a very human being once. And what it is more, it had been white. Very obviously. If that manuscript was true as I think it was, this being had been used for the diversion of the amphitheater before its life had become wholly extinct and supplanted by automatic impulses controlled from outside. On its white and only slightly hairy chest, some letters had been gashed or branded. I had not stopped to investigate, but had merely noted that they were in awkward and fumbling Spanish. An awkward Spanish implying a kind of ironic use of the language by an alien inscriber, familiar neither with the idiom nor the Roman letters used to record it. The inscription had read Secuestrado a la voluntad Secuestrada a la voluntad de Zenayan en el cuerpo decapitado de Tlayub, seized by the will of Knayan in the headless body of Tlayub. Also, what did he saw? Did he see the body, the mangled body of Tlayub? Or did he see a mix of Tlayub and Zamakana? Am I still going? I just finished my torturous reading. Yes. Tortures to who? Well, I don't know, to you, maybe. Yeah, just finished the Mound, Vincent. Yeah, the dude went into the passage, saw scary things, and came out. Killer's reading is always lovely. Kinda doubt it, but thank you. Thank you, you're too kind. Well, I've been reading for 2 hours. I might have to go somewhere, so it's go time. You just came back, Vincent, but I'm sorry. I must leave now. I must go. Yes. Let's see. Let's search for a raid. Do you have a suggestion? Or anyone in chat, actually? Boom. Boom, boom. Yin? Reading Yin? Naruhodo. We can read Yin, yes. Yes. She's playing Spirit Hunter, nice. Shining Yin or Sleepy? Okay, give me a moment. Okay, I can use this tab because yes. Okay, let's say what? Where is the thing? Here? No. Oh, come on, man. There we go. You shall not see all my bars. Nope. All my test bars. Nope. Okay, so Yin will be cara or face. Yes. Heads. And sleep will be tails or crow. Yin. No, sleepy is tails. Yin is heads. Yin is heads. Yin is heads. Yin is heads. Yes, yes. Let's do again. Okay. Then I guess we can go and rate Sleepy again. Too much effort? Well, that was not too much effort, you know. It was not. Too much effort would be, you know, making like a Hunger Games game to decide who to rate. I could totally do that, yes. Do I have enough people to do that? No, but I could do it anyway. Okay. The Sleepy. There you go. She's still playing Soul Worker. Let's go. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming to my stream and listening to my slurred words. I'm blaming Mr. H.P. Lovecraft and his way of writing. Yes. Not my fault. No. Okay. And I'm not sure when I'll stream next week. It will depend a bit on the weather. I have not seen the weather predictions yet. But yeah, but I'll be streaming next week, yes. Also, I'm on vacation, so maybe I'll have more energy. Maybe. Somehow I doubt that. Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. Hope you enjoyed. I had fun, even though the reading was not super great. Anyway, no self-doubting more. No. Okay. Thank you and bye. Yeah. Bye. Say hello to the sleepy elf, because I probably won't be able to really see her stream because bad internet. But yeah, see you. Bye. Bye.